Hello everyone, we are going to talk about learner-centered learning. Student-centered learning is also known as learner-centered learning, student-centered learning, child-centered learning. According to Sparrow and Swan, definitions are confused with other teaching strategies such as self-directed learning, learner-focused learning, autonomous learning, independent learning, collaborative learning, experimental learning, problem-based learning, and constructivist learning. For introduction, student-centered learning is an approach to education focusing on the needs, abilities, interests, capacities, talents, backgrounds, and learning styles of the students, with the teacher as facilitator instead of other approaches which are focused on educational process. Students also make decisions about how, what, when, and how to learn. According to Hassan, students will have higher motivation to learn when they feel they have a real stake in their own learning. In student-centered learning, are effective and Harp Hukulski-Radolf explained the characteristics of good learners as following: have clear goals, use available resources effectively, know about their strengths and weaknesses, take responsibility for their own learning, plan, monitor, evaluate, and adapt their learning process. Traditional versus student-centered learning. For traditional, teacher as fountain of all language, students are passive and receptive, learning restricted to a classroom. On the other hand, student-centered learning, teacher is as facilitator, students are active, learning not restricted to classroom, time, and place. For traditional, teacher is primary information giver and evaluator, and for student-centered learning, teacher is coach and facilitator. For traditional, teaching and assessing is separate. For student-centered, teaching and assessing is combined with summative and formative assessments. Assessment is confused to monitor learning. For traditional learning, assessment is used to increase learning and diagnose learning mistakes. On the other hand, for traditional learning, giving right answers, and for student-centered learning, learning from mistakes. And learning is assessed with only test papers for traditional, where learning is assessed with tests, projects, and portfolios. As a background of the study, according to Wikipedia, theorists like John Dewey, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky, whose collective work focus on how students learn, is primarily responsible for the move to student-centered learning. Key amongst these changes is the premise that students actively construct their own learning. First sparks of student-centered learning are related with Harvard's work in 1905 and Dewey's work in 1956. And Carl Rogers developed approach into a general theory of education. According to Brandeis and Jenis, student-centered learning was invented by Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers says, "I know I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only provide the environment in which he can learn." Rogers explained how the power should shift from teacher to the learner because in traditional environment students are passive and bored. In his book, which is called Freedom to Learn for the 80s, Rogers mentions a leader or person who is perceived as an authority figure in the situation, is sufficiently secure within himself or herself and in his or her relationship to others that he or she experiences an essential trust in the capacity of others to think for themselves to learn for themselves. Carl Rogers followed 5 hypotheses as following. A person cannot teach another directly. A person can only facilitate another's learning. A person learns significantly only those things that are perceived as being involved in the maintenance of or enhancement of the structure of self. Experience, which if assimilated would involve a change in the organization of self, tends to be resisted through denial or dissertation of symbolism. The structure and organization of self appears to become more rigid under threats and to relax its boundaries when completely free from threat. The educational situation which most effectively promotes significant learning is one in which threat to self of the learner is reduced to a minimum and differentiated perception of the field is facilitated. Learning theories: cognitive theory, computed in the mind; constructivist theory, activity discovery and independent learning. According to O'Neill and Mahon, explain the learning theories in the student-centered learning as following way. The cognitive wave supports the idea that the activity of learning is computed in the head or as often described in the mind. The constructivist wave of activity is related more of performing physical activities, for example projects. Student-centered learning has some connections with the social constructivist wave, which emphasizes activity and the importance of communities of practice. Principles: the learner has full responsibility for her or his learning. Involvement and participation are necessary for learning. The relationship between learners is more equal. The teacher becomes a facilitator and resource person. Learning how to learn. Every student can learn. Success provides intrinsic motivation. Individual learning processes. Every student has his or her own learning patterns. The goals of student-centered learning. Jones introduced an aim as following: we don't want our students to become people who can't communicate in the real world, panic when they can't think of the right words to use, are tongue-tied because they are worried about making mistakes and losing face, can't survive without a teacher to help them and guide them, look away in embarrassment when someone asks, "Can anyone here speak English?" Because we want students to believe themselves that if they want to learn and achieve, they can achieve. In the other hand, we should balance the importance of the content and learners' individual needs. Life is not as simple as in the past or even yesterday, so we should prepare them for productive and healthy future with self-confidence. Some students complain that school is irrelevant and they can reach information and they can learn outside of the school with real life experiences and internet. Thus, teachers should bring real life activities to make lessons relevant for students. Also, we should bring technology in schools to make students to come to school with desire and curiosity. Thus, learner-centered learning is suitable for these goals. Bransford, Brown and Cocking suggest that technology can support learning in 5 ways. To bring exciting curricula into the classroom that is based on real-world problems and that involves students in finding their own problems, testing ideas, receiving feedback and working collaboratively with other students or practitioners beyond the school classroom. To provide tools and scaffolds that enhance learning, support thinking and problem solving, model activities, and guide practice to represent data in different ways. To give students and teachers more opportunities for feedback, reflection,